All right, while he's pulling up my first video, it's Sai Baba. That's it. Just wait one sec, and then we'll just watch a little bit. Okay, so tonight I'm going to give you an Eastern religion sampler. We'll call it the Journey to the East, and I will give you some qualifiers this time. So I like to teach first person. I'm going to basically try to convert you to Hinduism. And then after that, Buddhism. And then after that, Taoism. I got an hour? So we'll see how it goes.
You have until 9 o'clock tonight.
We'll see how it goes. But I'm going to be in a mode. So once again, if you want to know what I actually believe, I'll linger afterwards and you can talk to me. But I really want to challenge you because, like I told you, I was brought up Baptist fundamentalist, and we'd have missionaries come in from India or Pakistan or somewhere in the Far East, and they would talk about basically these ignorant savages that worshipped idols and of stone and gold and bronze, and I was just like, whoa, that's just like in the Old Testament. And as a kid, I didn't know any better. But as I got older and I went on my little quest to find out, I saw this movie based on a book by Somerset Maugham called The Razor's Edge. And there's an old version from the 50s, which is good, but they did another one with Bill Murray, of all people, but it's like a serious role for him. And it's a man's quest for meaning in life. And during this movie, he goes to Tibet and goes and meets these lamas high up in the mountains, these Buddhist priests. And a book gets mentioned in this movie called the Upanishads. And I'd never heard of the Upanishads before. And so I went and got myself a copy, and my whole conception of Hinduism changed immediately from being an ignorant, superstitious, backward Stone Age religion to being incredibly philosophically sophisticated. And it blew me away. And so I would really recommend, if you're studying other religions, don't read, you can read commentaries on them, but I would recommend read their own scriptures, read their own sources, if you really want to get an understanding of what they believe. Then if you want to go back and look at a commentary on it, that's another thing to help you understand. All right, this is just to kind of set the mood.
The sound might not work first try.
What were those scriptures called? I think
The Upanishads. Oh. Okay, you can. Yeah. That was Sai Baba. He is a guru from India. Anyone know what guru means?
That's Lizzie's question.
What is a guru?
Is it a Hindu teacher?
It is, but it has a meaning. The word has a meaning. A guru is a darkness remover. Ooh. And that was Sai Baba. He had millions of devotees all over the world. And he has documented manifest healings of cancer, of different diseases, of manifesting objects. His devotees would have his images in their home, and it would collect this like sacred ash. He could manifest ash from his fingertips. Very interesting guy. And in this process in Hinduism, like anything, like in Christianity, you have kind of like a folk Christianity, and then you have the religion of the scholars, right? And the intellectuals, the philosophers. And so what I want to give you tonight is more the philosophical underpinnings of Eastern religions, and I'm going to start with Hinduism because it is one of the oldest religions in the world. They can at least orally trace their scriptures back to 2300 BC or BCE. Anyone know when the oldest book of the Bible was written? Or what the oldest book of the Bible is? Job. Any ideas about the time frame? It was about 1800 BCE, I believe, is we have the book of Job. So Hinduism is at least 500 years older, at least as an organized religion in that sense. Fascinating. Okay. What's going to help you in wrapping your head, because it's so different, the thinking in the East, is if you keep this in mind, keep coming back to this, it will help make things clear. All is one, the truth is the whole. In the West, we have specialized in distinguishing things, like what's the difference between this and that. In the East, they focus on how are things connected? How are they part of the same? So it's a very different approach of life and reality. And a lot of people don't know this because there are over, I think, 30 million gods in Hinduism. But Hinduism is actually a monotheistic religion. Why is it a monotheistic religion? Because all those gods are different manifestations of the one. It's just different ways that God is appearing in the world or in different properties. Like in the Christian tradition, we have a Trinity, right? But they're not three gods, right? It's three persons of one Godhead. And that's how the Hindus are seeing things. Did you guys know Hinduism has a Trinity? We have Brahman. Brahman. And this is the high God. He's often depicted with four heads, one facing in every direction. And that's showing his like omniscience or awareness of past, future, present. Then we have Shiva. Shiva is like creator, destroyer. He'll often be depicted with many arms, doing the cosmic dance on top of a dwarf of ignorance. If you saw Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, most of these gods have female consorts. There's male and female aspects of them. And Kali Ma who was highlighted in the Temple of Doom, you know, wearing the necklaces of human skulls and all of that great stuff. And then finally we have Vishnu. And these I can't directly correlate to Christianity. I can't be like Father, Son, Spirit, that sort of thing. But this is kind of like the preserver who comes into the world to bring goodness, to repair where damage is, to bring light into the darkness. So this is the Hindu Trinity. But beyond this is Paramita Brahman. And this is the high God beyond description. There's nothing we can say about this being. In fact, Hindus prefer to describe what God is not. So they would say God is not two, rather than saying God is one, because that confines God. And there's a similar tradition in Christianity, especially in Eastern Orthodoxy. It's the via negativa way. Instead of like in the West, where we like to posit positive attributes of God, like his holiness, his power, his wisdom, his strength, his compassion, the via negativa way talks about what is God, what God is not. God is not bound. God is not limited. Those sorts of things to describe God. And I think it's beautiful in all these traditions, this type of thing. Yes?
What did you say the first and second gods were?
So this is kind of the high God here, but they're in this Trinity, and this is creator, destroyer. Also, he participates in creation, and Vishnu is more like the preserver aspect.
What was the name of the god beyond?
Paramita Brahman. Paramita Brahman. In addition to the Hindu Trinity, there are avatars. Does anyone know what an avatar is? No, not that. Yes. Yes. So, any of you that are video gamers or that sort of thing, when you pick a character or an avatar, that is how you're interacting in that program. Well, that is how the gods interact in our world. They take on avatar forms. And Vishnu, I believe, had 10 avatars. We are waiting for the last. And the one you're probably most familiar with, I'm going to give you very abbreviated, is Krishna. You've heard of the Hare Krishnas? So this was the aspect of Lord Vishnu that was incarnated in physical form and lived amongst us. And when I was young, I just thought this was like Greek mythology and stuff like this. But with Orthodox Hindus, and once again, Hinduism is a made-up word from the West. People didn't call themselves Hindus in India. It was just an easy category to put all the different traditions of India under one umbrella. So just be aware of that. But this sect of Hinduism, or the Vedas, are devotees of the incarnation of Vishnu into the world. And he came to bring enlightenment to the East. A very famous guru was sent to America, I believe in the 60s, maybe even in the 50s, and his name was Yogananda. And his mission was to bring the teachings of India to the West, but he realized very early on Westerners were not going to be able to handle the iconography, all the symbolism, all the different gods and demons and devils and stuff in Hinduism. And so he tried to explain it to people in the West in terms that they were used to. So who is the Western incarnation of God? Jesus. Jesus would be like the avatar of God in human flesh, so he can interact in the world. He can eat and drink, he get tired, sleep, etc. And so how Yogananda brought his message was, he said, just as Krishna came to the East to bring enlightenment, Jesus came to the West to bring salvation. Now, this is a very interesting distinction, because there is no sin in this Hindu concept I'm teaching you about. What there is ignorance. And the way you cure ignorance is through enlightenment. And so that is why their focus is on knowledge and knowing. And interestingly enough, though, the devotees of Krishna, the Hare Krishnas, actually are pursuing a devotional aspect, hoping that Krishna will help them into a better reincarnation. Fascinating. Later, I'm going to highlight another one, Shiva. One of his incarnations was Hanuman. And why don't you go ahead and play that video, the Hanuman video. And bring the volume down a little for this, my old ears. is a nice video because you'll see a lot of the Hindu iconography in it, and I'll try to explain it as we go through. These tunes are traditional Hindu worship kirtans. Catchy. See the tika marks on their forehead? That is like a U. That signifies they're devotees of Vishnu. Devotees of Shiva will have horizontal marks across their foreheads. Fighting the demons. Pause it, please. That line, when I first saw this video, I was blown away. We talk about Jesus in our hearts. This is Ram, which is another incarnation of Vishnu. Ram in your heart. Yes. When you're separate, that's when you serve. When you're in union, that's when you merge. So there is a distinction between the Godhead and a unity simultaneously. Sound familiar to anybody?
Why is he ripping himself apart?
He's showing that he has Ram in his heart. Yes. Yeah, it would depend on the particular, different, like in Christendom, different gestures will mean different things. So we'd have to, often it's a sign of power or authority, but we'd have to see. Okay, keep going. The blue tone symbolizes purity or holiness. Ram is the name of a Hindu god, so this is chants of devotion to the god Ram. Okay, so we talked about even though there's 30 million gods, there is only one God. And so look at this metaphor of like a great jewel. So God is like the totality of reality. He's a great jewel, but he has all these different facets. And each facet is a different way of perceiving or God reflecting. And so in Hinduism, we have these major ones, but Hindus would be completely happy adding your favorite deities because Jesus, Allah, even the Buddha would all be just different ways to see into the Godhead, a different path into it.
I'm wondering, you're talking about the distinction between polytheism and monotheism, right? But would you ever consider defining Hinduism as pantheism?
It is pantheism.
So pantheism and monotheism go hand in the same thing?
And this is what pantheism is. All is one. There is not a distinction. Yes, very good. We'll talk about that in a minute. So when Islam, the Mughals invaded India, and they came into Delhi, and they saw all, you can imagine, what Muslims thought of Hindu idolatry. And the Hindus welcomed them in. They were being conquered, and they said, show us your gods, and we will build statues to honor them and add them to the pantheon. And the Muslims, of course, said, there is no God but Allah. And they said, that's great. What does he look like? We'll make a statue for him, and he can go right in there with the rest of them. They'd be very comfortable with Yahweh. They'd be very comfortable with Jesus. Wakentanka. Zeus. Hera. Rocks. Trees. Yes, fish. Fred. Bob. Betty. Because in the end, it's all just different reflections of one thing. And Hindus believe that whichever tradition you're in, if you follow it, it will lead you to the center. Fascinating. So in this sense, it's an incredibly tolerant religion in a lot of ways, or can be, because it's inclusive, whereas the Western traditions are exclusive. Our way or the hell way. Our God is over all, right? Whether you're a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim, they all believe that they're the only ones with the true God. These other ones are false gods. Even in their own sects, they often don't believe other people understand their God correctly, and we'll call them heretics and outliers. Yes?
So is that like what you wrote down, kind of representing like we are image bearers?
We are what? No, more than that. Tell me your name again. Kylie Malia. You are that. And what I mean by that is, when we talk about that, what is the eternal essentialness of reality? You are that. Water is a powerful symbolism of Hinduism. We have the Ganges, the Nile, the mighty Mississippi, the Amazon, all flowing into the oceans. But when they get into the ocean, they don't say, I'm the Amazon, I'm the Nile. They are the ocean. The ocean represents God in this sense. The manifestations would be in the rain, the snowflakes, going into creeklets and streams, but they all return to the sea. But the cycle is one. Water is one. And so that's a beautiful picture of Hinduism. When bees gather pollen and nectar from various flowers and they bring them into the hive and convert them to honey, when you taste the honey, you don't say, that's a daisy, that's a pansy, that's a hyacinth. It's become one. All the distinctions merge. If you take a seed from the great giant sequoias and you split it in half and you look at the essence inside from which that came, you share in that same essence. Thou art that. This principle of God permeates all reality. There is no place where God is not. All things are, He is all things, and all things are contained in Him. Yes?
What would you say the difference is between Hinduism and spirituality?
And what?
Spirituality. I think everything is God.
Oh, that would be a type of pantheism. And maybe for those of you not familiar with these terms, let's roll them out real quick. So pantheism we would have God, and I'm going to symbolize God with these vertical lines. And we would have nature. And I'll represent them by horizontal lines. So in this sense, God and nature become synonyms. It's just two different ways of talking about the same concept or principle. In deism, let me get rid of that. Let's say classic theism. You have God, and you have nature. Where there's a distinct separation between the two, creator and created. But there's another term, panentheism. Pan means all, theism means God. This means all in God, or God in all. And what this would look like, where you have nature or creation contained within God. You see, it is not God, but it is contained within God. God permeates it all. Which of those three do you think is the most biblical? Really? But isn't God here? The problem with this model, and it's been taught in Western Christianity for over a millennia, is it can lead to what we call deism, where you have a detached God from his creation. But even the scriptures tell us it is in him we live and move and have our being. Whither shall I go from thy presence? If I go to the ends of the earth, thou art there. Fascinating. It maintains the distinction between creator and creation, but it doesn't separate God from the creation. It's not like God somewhere in outer space, and maybe he'll come back someday or he won't, and we're here trying to do the best we can. This really emphasizes the immanence of God. This is focused more on the transcendence of God, where God is outside of and beyond creation, but God also permeates and indwells all creation, from the smallest atom or quark to the greatest, to the entire cosmos and beyond. Fascinating. Time check.
7:17.
Oh, great. So let's make sure we got a couple key terms down. Whoops. Like. Anyone know what dharma is?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Panentheism. Panentheism is nature is in God. If that's the case, how would you classify fallen nature after the fall?
Still in God.
Is it still in God, or are we separate?
Guess where hell is?
Hell is this
In God.
in God. I thought I always grew up with it being we're now separated from God, and God has to.
But if you're separated from God, and it means God is not with you, God's no longer omnipresent, is he? If God is not in hell, he is not omnipresent. Right?
Yeah. I just feel like
Yeah. I told you my dad's a Baptist preacher, and I came home once when I was just learning these terms. And I think it was Thanksgiving or something, but there was a ketchup bottle on the table. I don't know why there was ketchup at Thanksgiving, but anyways, I asked my dad, I said, Dad, is God in that ketchup bottle? And he goes, don't blaspheme in this house, boy. And I said, he says, of course he's not in the ketchup bottle. And I said, I feigned shock. I said, are you telling me there's a ketchup-shaped bottle vacuum in the universe where God does not exist? And he stopped for a second. He said, no, I'm not saying that. I said, well, what are you saying, Dad? He said, I'm saying God is in the ketchup bottle. Right? Fascinating. So what is dharma? Not quite. Were any of you brought up Catholic? Do you know the concept of charisma? It's like your spiritual gift or purpose, why you were put into the world. That's what dharma is. And there's even dharma for different stages. Like young people, their dharma is to grow, to play, to learn. And then as you get older, you're learning the ways of your parents, you become like an apprentice, whatever. And remember, you have a caste system in India, so warriors are learning from their fathers to be warriors, merchants to be merchants, scholars to be teachers, kings to be rulers, etc. And dharma is fulfilling what you were put here to do in this particular incarnation. And if you fulfill your dharma, when you reincarnate, when you are remanifest after this vehicle wears out and you get another one, if you fulfilled your dharma and you are not weighed down with karma, you can advance to the next level towards godhood, towards enlightenment. So karma is kind of like the Christian concept of you reap what you sow. Very interesting. And then reincarnation is this idea of coming back again and again and again. And by the way, to get to where you are now takes over 10,000 reincarnations, maybe hundreds, maybe millions. So congratulations, everyone in this room. You are on the final stretch towards enlightenment. Especially the men, you're a little bit further ahead than the females. Surprise, surprise, right? Yes?
Like some of the gods like have appetites, so they like do it. So in that sense, like them going into an avatar and then like getting another one, would that be the same as what we're doing by God?
Yeah, in a way. Like mini versions of what the divine is doing. Does that sound familiar too? No? Do you believe are you coming from a Christian tradition? Well, you said we, and I wanted to clarify who we was. You think humanity as a whole comes back again and again? Okay. Let me talk about this. This is called the Wheel of Samsara, or the Wheel of Illusion. Yeah, I'm just going to abbreviate this into a few spokes. So here we have the Sea of Brahman out here. And Brahman manifests himself into the creation. And this could be like a paramecium. And so the dharma of a paramecium may simply be to divide, replicate, and then you get to go on to the next. And so when this dies, he gets to reincarnate, maybe this time as an ant. So we got our little ant guys. And maybe you come back as a worker ant, worker ant, worker ant. You get to advance up to a warrior ant. Maybe you mess up and destroy a hive, so you have to go back and be a worker, warrior, drone, queen. And then once you fulfilled your ant dharma, maybe you can come as a butterfly. And then after you fulfill your transformations and your dharma in this, maybe you can come as like some beastie, like a fox or a rabbit or some other sort of critter. And then eventually you will make your way to becoming a human. So like I said, you guys are doing well, you're on your last rung. But in the Hinduism, classic Hinduism, you had the caste system. And so I'm going to blow up this piece of the pie. But before I get there, the goal is when you work your way through maybe 10,000 reincarnations of being different types of humans, you come to the realization that thou art that. You are it. It's almost like God playing a game of cosmic hide and seek with himself. Because when he reincarnates into the world, this paramecium probably forgot that it was God. And it's just doing a paramecium thing, right? This is the world of illusion. This is the world of impermanence. This will all pass away. This is eternal. All these different stages until you get to this point as an enlightened human where you may exit back into the Sea of Brahman, just like a river returning to the sea. And then guess what happens? You get thrown back in again. But it's not you anymore, right? It's kind of like, let's go back to the ocean analogy. You have the ocean and you have individual waves. Imagine your incarnation as a wave. It has form, you can measure it, it has personality, but it's not separate from the ocean, and it always gets resumed back into the ocean. But then when a new wave forms, it no longer has memory of being another wave. It is the ocean. Does that make sense? Yes?
What is Hinduism's theory on evolution?
play the not that one.
This one?
Yeah, where did you see it?
It says right there.
Oh, yes.
Ready?
Yeah. I'm going to blow up this piece of the pie.
There was no heaven, no earth, no space. There's nothing. The waves of vast dark ocean lapped on the edges of this nothingness, and a giant cobra floated in the waters. Lying asleep in the snake's coils was Lord Vishnu, and the snake kept him safe, and he slept really peacefully. Slowly, a sound started. It grew louder and filled the emptiness. It throbbed with energy and drove the nothingness away. Lord Vishnu woke up, and a magnificent lotus flower grew from his navel. Right in the middle of the flower sat Brahma. Lord Vishnu told Brahma to set to work and create a world. And still, sitting in the flower, Brahma calmed the wind, stilled the waves, and brought peace. Brahma split the lotus flower, making 3 different parts: the heavens, the earth, and the skies. To start with, the earth was bare, so Brahma created everything: the grass and all kinds of flowers, trees and plants. He gave these the ability to feel. He let living things evolve, so that the earth became full of animals, insects, birds and fish. He gave these the ability to touch and smell, as well as the ability to see, hear and move. Soon the world was alive with life, and the air was filled with the sounds of Brahma's creations. So, Hindus have many ways of thinking about God. As part of this, they say there is one God, but use different names for God when he does different things. When God creates, he is called Brahma, and when God looks after the creation, he is called Vishnu. But God has a third name. At some time, God will decide to bring this universe to an end, and as Lord Shiva, he will destroy the universe.
Whoa. That was the same order as the Genesis creation account. Did you notice it? Now, she mentioned evolution, but I think she was simply affected by the culture again, because more Orthodox or traditional Hindus are very adamant that evolution is not how life comes. Life comes from life. Life does not come from non-life. And very interesting. So all life comes from God. God is life.
So it said in the video how he'll like come upon and then destroy the whole universe. Why?
And then start all over again.
Why would he? Why? Like.
I couldn't answer that question. I am not at that level of enlightenment to tell you why. But it is like a cosmic dance of creation, nurturing, and destruction, renewal, creation.
They believe that do they believe that he's only created one Earth and has never destructed it yet?
No, there's cycles upon cycles upon cycles. And it goes forever. Fascinating. So this is that piece of the pie, the human piece, and these were the traditional caste systems of Hinduism. The lowest are outcasts or the untouchables. Then we would have the laborers, the merchants, the warriors, and the Brahmins. And it is within this caste, the nobility, the intellectuals, the scholars, the priests, that they have the best chance of realizing their God nature and escaping this wheel of illusion. Okay? Super fascinating. Now, I'm going to pivot briefly to show you some of the difference between Hinduism and Buddhism, because Buddhism is to Hinduism as Christianity is to Judaism. Let me say that once more. Buddhism is to Hinduism as Christianity is to Judaism. And Siddhartha Gautama, who was the historical person living in northern India, probably modern-day Nepal, he was the son of a Brahmin. And, no, I'm sorry, he was the son of a king, of a chieftain in his northern kingdom. And upon his birth, there were all these signs and omens of portents that this was a very special child that had been born. And this old hermit came in from the mountains, and he said, I want to see the child. And the king let him hold the child, and he said, oh, this child will either become the greatest warlord India has ever seen and unite the subcontinent, or he will become a spiritual teacher that will bring enlightenment and end suffering for humankind. And his father, being a king, said, we'll take option number one, thank you very much. And the hermit said, well, that may be your desire, but that may not be how things turn out. So his father, knowing this prophecy, tried to bring up Siddhartha as a warrior, as a leader, as a king. And so he tried to keep him away from religious sensibilities and trained him more in statescraft and the arts of war. He also sheltered him in these palaces where the only people around him were young and beautiful and healthy, and everyone was doing well, everything was beautiful and good. But as Siddhartha got older, he had just had his first son, he had a beautiful wife, and he said, Father, how am I supposed to rule my kingdom if I've never seen it? I want to go out and see my kingdom. And so his father kind of painted the main streets of the city outside of the palace. He gave the peasants new clothes, threw a feast so they were all happy and joyous, gave them flower petals to throw. And Siddhartha was paraded through the town on an elephant with his servant, and the crowds were cheering him. And he was so taken by the kingdom that later that night, he woke his servant and he says, I want to go back into town again. But now the facade was gone, and the pretty clothes and the feasting, and he was seeing it as it really was. And for the first time in his life, he saw old people, and they were all kind of wrinkled, and they were losing their hair, and they were kind of hunched and shuffling around. And he asked his servant, he says, what is wrong with those people? And he says, they're old, Siddhartha. And he says, what's old? He said, old age comes to us all. And Siddhartha says, even princes? And he said, yes, my lord, even princes. And as they traveled on, he heard this horrible screaming, and they were drawn to this house where this woman was just writhing in agony. And he asked his servant, what's wrong with that woman? And he said, she's sick, my lord, she's suffering. And he goes, what is sick? He had not even been exposed to sickness in his lifetime. And he said, sickness comes to us all, Siddhartha. No one goes from birth to death without being sick. And he says, even princes? He said, even princes. And he says, show me this death. So his servant took him down to the banks of the Ganges, where the Hindus would burn the dead. Because he says, when the body dies, it becomes stiff like wood and must be burned. And then the ashes are thrown into the river. And Siddhartha, can you imagine being so sheltered that you had never seen old age, sickness, or death, and then to see it all in a matter of hours? And the last person he encountered on the way was a sadhu, and that is a ascetic priest. And those are people that deprive their body of pleasure and good in order to try to release the spirit. And so they would do extreme forms of asceticism, like living out in nature, just out in the open rain. They would live off of water, rain and bird droppings and crazy stuff like that. And so Siddhartha vowed that he would not rest until he found the end to suffering. And so that became the beginning and the journey of the Buddha. And so he left the palace, he left all the pleasure, and he went and lived in a hermit in the woods for decades and practiced these extreme ascetic principles. And if you've ever seen Buddhas depicted from Southeast Asia, That's kind of what they prefer to depict him in his emaciated, you can see his ribs, and he's in a full lotus position meditating. If you go to the Buddhists in Japan or China, they take on different cultural hybridizations. But one day while he was meditating, he had actually already developed other disciples and other hermits who were following him because he was so zealous to find this answer to this end of suffering. And he was by the banks of the river, and he heard a music teacher instructing his student, and it was like a sitar type instrument. And the teacher told the student, he said, if you tighten the string too tight, it will snap, but if it is too loose, it will not play. And it's kind of like Aristotle's golden mean, where he was like, oh, I'm wrecking in this ditch of over asceticism. I don't want to wreck in the other ditch of pleasure or hedonism, so I need to find a balance between the two paths. And so that is called the middle way in Buddhism. And the culmination of his quest was he fasted for 40 days and nights. Sound familiar? Under the Bodhi tree. And towards the end of this encounter, Mara came, the Dark Lord, the evil one, to tempt him. And he basically tempted him with power. He said, I will give you riches and the kingdoms of the world. He tempted him with women and lust. He tempted him with all types of pleasure. And Siddhartha Gautama said, O Lord of my own ego, you are pure illusion. And after he resisted the temptation of Mara, he realized the last block to enlightenment was the concept that he was an individual self from the one. And so when he renounced his own ego, he reached enlightenment and realized he was connected to the universe am I. And that became the focus of Buddhist and his teachings. And in fact, Buddha means the enlightened one. It's a title. So there could be many Buddhas. Unlike Hinduism, however, Siddhartha Gautama believed you didn't have to be a priest or a Brahmin to achieve enlightenment and your God nature. Even a dog could achieve Buddhahood or God nature. An untouchable, an outcast could achieve Buddhahood. And so guess who his followers were? These folks, right? The lower caste, the outcasts, not the religious leaders, not those in power and control, but he had basically opened the keys of the kingdom or enlightenment to everyone. You didn't have to be in these elite castes to get there. And so fascinating how that spread throughout from India and then to China, etc. And I'm just giving you a sampler, so I can't go into too much more detail than that. Any questions per se? Yes? I have not. Sorry. It's all right. So the goal of enlightenment, they use the metaphor of a 1,000-petaled lotus. Lotus is like a water lily. Its roots go down into the muck at the bottom of the pond or the lake. But then out of that muck down below, a stalk comes up through the water, and it puts out leaves on the surface, and then a beautiful stalk of this flower. And that symbolizes coming out of ignorance and illusion into enlightenment. It's kind of like the Hindu version of Plato's cave. So interesting, these concepts. And so the idea for the Hindu, let me go back to the Hindus for a second. Okay. So the goal of the Hindu, each of these lotus petals of the heart represent false selves or roles, but it's not the essential us. Like, I'm a teacher, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, I'm an American, I'm all these different things, but that's not who I am. Those are just different ways to categorize or label me or indicate things that I'm doing. And so in this deconstruction through meditation, you are removing these false identifications of who you are until you can peek into the center of the core of your being. And who is in the core of your being? None other than Atman. And Atman is Brahman within. So, my young Christian friends, if I ask you, if you deconstructed your lives from what you do and your relationships and your ethnicity and your nationality and your gender and all those sorts of things, and you got to the core of your being, who are you? Who's in your heart? Who's in the center of your being? God within. Whoa. Maybe not so ignorant as it seemed when I was a child. So is there a difference? What's the difference? This sure sounds like what we were talking about last night. Renouncing your own ego as illusion and seeing that your true essential nature and reality is God? Yes?
I'd say Hinduism is more based upon works.
Generally, yes. There are sects that are not works-based, they're more devotion-based. But yes, as a general rule, it is a workout, and it's up to you to reach that. And the way you get there is through knowledge, not because someone, in fact, one of the more offensive things to Hindus is this idea of someone else paid your karmic debt for you. That's kind of like the Christian model, right? It's like Jesus paid your karmic debt, so you don't have to come back again and again and deal with it. And Hindus are like, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to work it out. You have to work out your own enlightenment until you actually, and it's not just head knowledge, right? It's that complete, full, experiential knowledge that you are God. It's not just understanding the doctrine, because anyone could learn the doctrine. It's actually knowing that. Capital K, knowing. Interestingly enough, where the Buddhists differ from the Hindus is they would remove this and say, when you pull back that last petal, there's nothing there. You have no self. There is no self. But Buddhist nothingness is different than Western nothingness, because Buddhist nothingness is everythingness. Did you know that everything and nothing are the same by definition? You knew that? Did you guys know that? Everything and nothing are, would you like to see how? This actually I got from a Western philosopher, Hegel. I'm not going to write it, I'm going to say it to you. Nothing is that of which cannot be added to or taken away from. Everything is that of which cannot be added to or taken away from. What? Because if you could take something away from nothing, it wasn't nothing. And if you add something to nothing, it's not nothing anymore. If you take something away from everything, it's no longer everything. And if you can add something to everything, it wasn't everything to begin with. Therefore, everything and nothing are that of which you cannot add to or take away from. So This made Buddhism so much more understandable to me from a Western philosopher. How fascinating, where I understood they weren't nihilist in the sense that they didn't believe in anything exists, but they believed in everything. The universe am I. That is what they believed was at the core of their being, which is kind of just a different way of saying Atman, isn't it? So even though it looks like a difference, I think it's really kind of the same concept. But since you are a Christian group, I really want to press this. How is this different from Christianity?
I feel like us as Christians, we have an end goal. Like we have like a place to go to. We get to be with Christ. I was thinking that like Hinduists, whatever, they kind of like live over and over and over and over again, trying to become gods. But
It's not becoming, it's realizing who you already are. Yep.
what in the end?
So you're not achieving anything, you're just finally understanding what's really happening. And that's what I meant by it's like a game of cosmic hide and seek, where God puts himself into the world of illusion, lives all these different lives, kind of like choose your own adventure, and then he wakes up almost like out of amnesia, and he's like, oh my God, ollie ollie oxen free, I'm it. And then boom, he's back out into the universe am I.
So
I mean, what a great thing for God to do. You'd never get bored, right? You can live countless different manifestations of life through all eternity.
what happens when they finally decide to destroy the earth?
Then they started again.
And everyone dies, or
Yeah, but everyone is all in the one. So no one really ever dies.
oh, oh yeah.
Emptiness is form, form is emptiness. No life, no death,
Yeah.
no happiness,
Yeah.
no sorrow,
Yeah.
no pain, no pleasure. And that might be like, well, that doesn't sound very appealing. Well, you're not living in 5th century India, where maybe just having an even keel existence would be tremendous instead of down here in the pain and suffering. For most of you 21st century Americans, including myself, most of our life is just ridiculous pleasure. We might have little dips in our pleasure, but it's rare that we go down below the neutral into pain and suffering. And we might have little pains and sufferings. We may even have loss of a death of a loved one or family member, but most of our life is probably much more up here. And so what the Buddha was offering, he wasn't offering heaven, he wasn't offering salvation, he was simply saying, if you want to stop suffering, I can help you. And this is where we get into the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. This is the core of his teaching. Yes?
How old was Buddhism?
The Buddha lived, Siddhartha Gautama lived approximately 600 years before Christ in northern India, southern Nepal area. Historical figure. Yep. Krishna was 900 years before Christ. So if you're saying like, oh, these little copiers of Christianity, well, these were here long before Christianity.
So would you say like Hinduism is basically just like one big syncretism?
Yeah, they're really big into syncretism. Yes.
It was before Christianity, so when I don't remember his name, but the Buddha was tempted. That sounds very similar to what happened with Jesus. And
Yeah, brutally similar.
very like insanely similar.
Yes.
That's very
And if you really want to freak yourself out, when you're able to do research again, do a compare-contrast between Krishna and Christ. And when you see their stories, how they were born, what they performed on this earth, how they died, and this idea of coming again. I told you there were 10 avatars of Vishnu. The 10th is yet to come. His name is Kalki, and he will come riding on a white horse bearing a sword.
Bro, no way.
oh,
You're lying.
I am not lying.
I don't know if you want to answer this now, but
similar things to Christianity.
Yeah, why indeed? Perhaps they have tapped into some great cosmic truth. But help me. I want to know, how is this different from Christianity? I mean, we might not do the whole lotus blossom thing, but we might talk about open the door to your heart or the throne room of your heart or that kind of thing. So little different metaphors, but very similar concepts. So how is this different, Ethan?
Because with Hinduism, God is in all people. I don't know if I.
That's in Christianity too, isn't it?
Well, in for Second Peter 1, Peter is talking about confirming the calling of election, what you had brought up earlier. He's talking to followers of Christ and saying that they are now partakers
Of the divine nature.
Exactly.
They've become enlightened.
So, but people who are not in Christ.
What does John 1 say? And he was the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world.
The John 1:1.
I think it's 1:3.
John 1:3.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word.
Was made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made.
Yes.
So I don't
And
see it.
he was the light that lighteth everyone that cometh into the world. And you'll find that in someone mentioned like New Age religion or New Spirituality. You don't even hear that term anymore in California. And the reason I think that is because it's just California now. We don't have to call it New Age. It's just the way we kind of groove here in California. And it makes sense. We're on the Pacific Rim. Where on the East Coast, their influence is the old world and Europe and Africa and all of that. For us, it's Asia, right? That is where our influence is coming. So the amount of Hindu temples and Buddhist monasteries in California is stunning. When you get a chance, you might want to check this site out. It's one of my favorite websites, buddhanet.net. And there's a library of all the Buddhist scriptures, etc. There's a map of all the monasteries and temples and stuff in around the world, but specifically California. And there's apologists if you want to challenge a Buddhist. And they have some very... so it surprised me for Buddhists because I usually see them as more gentle and kind, but they had some very rough things to say about Christianity. Well, a lot had to do with its willingness to use force and power and violence to achieve its goals. Buddhism generally is a pacifistic religion, although there are exceptions, like the kamikaze pilots in Japan were Buddhist, but they're also Shinto. It was more of a hybrid, but fascinating.
But Buddhists don't call themselves a religion.
Who?
Buddhists. It's just a way of life.
Yeah, it's like some Christians are like, I'm in a relationship, I'm not in a religion. Yeah, a Buddhist could say the same thing.
What was the symbol? Wasn't the swastika, like Hitler's swastika, based off of a...
Yeah, I believe it was a symbol of good luck or fortune.
like a Hindu symbol?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very ancient symbol. Come on, people. How's Christianity different than this? What's going on? There is no self here. There's only God. Let me get rid of this. Maybe this will help you. And I'm going to put it in Christian terms for you. So we have Jesus in here, sitting in the center of our heart. And up here we've got the Father. Who will equate in this sense to Brahman. So, where do we fit in?
With Christianity, there was an ultimate sacrifice from Christ. Where is that sacrifice in?
There is no sacrifice because it's not about sin. It's about ignorance and learning the true nature of reality. Isn't that nicer? Don't you like that better? It's like you're not evil, you're ignorant. Aristotle thought the same thing. The parallels are quite shocking. He didn't believe in sin either. He believed in ignorance. There were knowledgeable people who did good things. There were ignorant people that did bad things. And so the way to deal with an ignorant person is to become their teacher, not their punisher. It's nice. Where's yourself? Or do you have no self? Are you just Jesus now? Are you just little Jesuses walking around? We just had this talk this morning. But there's also a new creation, right? In Christ. There's a new Fred, and where is this new Fred? New Fred's right in here, baby. I'm in Jesus. So the parallels are profound, but there are also incredibly important differences. I am connected to Christ, but I am not Christ. I am knit together with him, but I am not the creator of the universe. I am not the end-all, be-all. But do you see how close that is? It's incredible. Yes?
I guess it's Hinduism, like if you want to say sin is ignorance, and also that's the same thing in that way. The person is ignorant, but we are not sinful. It's our old self that is sinful, not necessarily our new self that is sinful. It's not the spirit that the flesh does.
Yes. Good. Ethan?
Another way that Christianity would be different is that in Hinduism, all things are God and everything is in God, I should say. 1 John 3, 10, when it talks about, practicing lawlessness. We went in 1 John 3 actually, where it's by this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. So it would be contradictory if everything was in God, but you can also not be of God. It would be almost like a kingdom divided would not stand.
But you would agree everything is in God, wouldn't you?
I would say that
Uh-oh.
God is.
Okay.
Well, you have to think about omnipresence because here it says that we can be not of God, and there are things that don't come from God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like with Beelzebub, when the Pharisees accused Jesus of using the power of Beelzebub to do all these miracles.
So are you saying the devil's not in God?
I would say that he is not God based on God would have then a kingdom divided, which would not stand. Jesus used that as a lesson.
Okay. Kevin Conover, if you're watching, this is why Hinduism, I believe, is much more rational than Christianity. And I actually learned this. I learned this from Spinoza, the Jewish philosopher from Amsterdam in the 16th century, who happened to be a pantheist, even though he was from Europe. How fascinating. And he's basically saying, well, what happens if we say the devil isn't God, or in God, however you want to put it? Ethan, are you God?
Yes.
You're God?
Oh, no, sorry. I thought you said, are you done? No, I'm not.
Okay. So now we got God minus the devil, whatever reality the devil had, and now we have minus whatever reality Ethan had. Are the forests outside, is that God? So now we have all the forest in the world minus the forest. Do you see what's going to happen if we keep going? And I keep subtracting things that aren't God? We're going to end up with everything's out here and nothing's in here. And poof, God no longer exists, but we just have the physical, material, or spiritual.
God's not omnipresent then?
And he,
Things outside of God?
right.
Also, it's 8
Each thing that is not God diminishes God. Every time you say something is not God, you are diminishing the totality of God. So if God is the totality of reality, that means all of these things have to be in here. There's nothing outside of God.
Wouldn't that also be putting God in a box of just physical realm?
No. There is no box. I drew a circle, which seems like a boundary, but God has no boundary. God has no perimeters.
But I don't think those things aren't in God. They're in the presence, like God is in.
Where are they then?
But God can be in their presence and not be made up of them.
But do you understand what I'm saying? If you start putting things outside of God, God now starts to become diminished and less and less and less. He's no longer the totality of reality. He's the totality of reality minus all humanity, all the angelic host, hell, heaven, anything that you want to posit as different from God until we diminish God entirely.
But they're not made up of God. Like the devil can't be made up of God. But he can be a separate being that can be in their presence.
But can he be outside of God?
The devil?
Can anything exist outside of God? No. And that is why I personally prefer panentheism, because you can have things in God, but it doesn't make them be God. Pantheism, they're synonymous. Everything is God. All is God. Classic deism, you end up getting this weird thing where you have God here and everything else out here.
Why does the forest not being God mean that God has to be God minus forest? Why can't God still be God and a forest exists not being God?
Because now you have God plus forest. Right? So if you have plus something, this is no longer everything.
But how can sin exist within God?
What is sin? Yeah, it's not a thing. It's an action or a relationship or an adjective. It's a description.
How do you explain before when we were separated from God because of sin? Until Jesus died on the cross.
You're asking me a Christian theological question?
Perhaps.
Okay, say it again. Even though I'm in Hindu mode, I'll try to answer you as a Christian.
All right. How do you explain before Jesus died on the cross for our sins, our separation from God because of our sin?
Isn't there a little jingle that says everyone who lived before Jesus is in hell? Right? Where did people go before Jesus came when they died? Sheol?
Did they have different sacrificing systems or whatnot?
Sure. But they still went to the grave, right? And I really don't want to get into that Christian theology of heaven and hell right now. But it's okay.
So we would then have to talk about how we don't go to heaven or we don't go to hell when we die. It would be more of a sleep.
Buddhists actually have 3 heavens and 3 hells. Yeah, the goal is to stop reincarnating by becoming enlightened. If you end up going to heaven or hell, it means you're not fully reincarnated. I mean, you're not fully enlightened, because even if you go to heaven to be with Jesus, there is still a you and a Jesus, which is two, not one. Full enlightenment means there's only one. But once you're fully enlightened, there's nothing to say. There's no one to say it to. There's no one to learn from. You are it. There is only one thing. There is no distinction, no separateness.
Okay. So I was listening to a sermon one time, and the pastor was talking about, it was something else, which I don't want to bring up because it's a whole other topic, but he was talking about like how if you limit God by saying he can't do something, then you're essentially like, not putting him in a box, not doing anything like that, but you're just like saying that God can't do things just because you don't understand it. So I'm saying like, why can't there be a forest or a person or like somebody that's not God? Why can't God make that happen? I mean, we might not understand it.
But where's God going to make it happen?
Well, I don't know, but I'm saying like,
There's nowhere outside of God. So where is he supposed to make these other beings?
like just because we don't understand that doesn't mean that he couldn't make it happen. Kind of like predestination versus free will. Like we don't understand that because there's several places in the Bible that contradict each other. But like, why can't God, like we're making it to where God can't? We're putting God in a box, I guess you could say. We're like we're not. I'm not explaining this well, but like God is.
I'm not the one putting God in a box. I'm saying God is everything. Anyone who says there's stuff besides God is the one who's limiting God, not me.
Why would that be limiting him?
Because it's God plus something else. Right? Now there's not one thing anymore. If there's not one thing anymore, God is no longer the totality of reality. By definition, there can only be one God. Yes?
But since God is not a location
No.
or substance,
No. He is spirit.
so substance and location are
Illusion. Transitory.
different, right, created by God.
They pass away.
So a forest being substance and location doesn't have to be God because it's substance and location.
They are illusions perceived through ignorance when we do not understand the true nature of reality, that all is one. Me talking to you right now is feeding the illusion, acting like I'm a teacher and you're a student. The reality is we are the same being. I am talking to myself right now. There is only one being in the universe. Yes.
Okay, so Hinduism is pantheism,
Yes.
and pantheism is saying
All
that
is one.
all is one. And then Christian,
Or all is God, you could say.
okay, and then you're saying that
Including forest.
would be how do you say it, the panentheism, which would be that there is
Most Christians would be very offended by that.
and with
They would go with classic theism, where you have God and creation.
but if we're saying that God is omnipresent and he is in everything,
That's the panentheism.
the panentheism would be that there is God and then there is his creation also within him. but
Within
he
him.
is also beyond that.
Beyond his creation.
Yes, and so that's what I'm saying.
Inside and outside simultaneously.
Yes, and that is the difference of Christianity is we are
Actually, Hindus believe that too.
Really?
Yes.
We are
Different sects of, once again, remember, this is 1 billion followers. And like in Christianity, you have lots of different sects and traditions. So I'm giving you like a very general, it would be like me teaching on Christianity, combining Catholics, Lutherans, Pentecostals, Baptists, Eastern Orthodox, and trying to teach them all as one without getting into their particular differences.
Wait, but does being present, like being all present, mean that you're? I feel like that's being omnipresent is different than like residing in all. Like you could be in the presence of something without being within it. You know, like separate. There's separation.
Sure.
Yeah.
But if you're separate from it, it means there's more than one thing.
Why?
Because if you weren't separate from it, you'd be in here. This is separate. This is two. This is one. When you're separate, that's when you serve. When you're united, that's when you and Ram merge. Never stopped. Oh dear.
Wait, what was the question again?
I didn't ask the question. The question came from back there. And I'm not quite sure what the struggle is with this idea of oneness. Either there's one thing or there's multiplicity of things. Even in your own traditions, the medieval scholastics defined substance as that of which is self-existing and self-consisting. Let me say that one more time. That which is self-existing and self-consisting. What does that describe? There's only one being in the cosmos that describes, that I'm aware of, and that is God. He is not dependent on anything else for its existence or its continuance. Everything else is dependent, and there's only one substance by that definition, and that's God. Everything else is contingent under that one substance.
Sorry, I'm circling back to the pantheism. How would that work for Buddhists if their ultimate goal is to become like fully God? But if they
The Buddhists, they're not trying to become God. That's the Hindu.
and suffering.
Yes. Oh, which we totally skipped over as we got into this stuff. Do you want to know how to end suffering? I could tell you that. These are the Four Noble Truths. And just blow a whistle or something when you need me to stop. Because I can just keep going. What time?
8:14.
Were we supposed to stop at 8? Okay, let me wrap.
Yeah, Fred.
Okay. Okay, the Four Noble Truths. The first is, to exist is to suffer. Do you guys agree with that? If you come into this world, you're going to suffer. Okay. The second noble truth, suffering is caused by desire. Suffering is caused by desire. Because when we desire things and we do not get them, it causes us pain. When we have expectations and they're not fulfilled, we suffer. We're in pain. If we want to be healthy and we become sick, we suffer. If we want love and we're alone, we suffer. If we want our children to live and prosper and they die, we suffer. And so the way to stop suffering is to stop desiring. And that's, remember I told you, the even keel? That's what Buddhism is offering you. If your life is one of pain and suffering, maybe a few moments of joy, that's probably not appealing. I mean, that's appealing. But if you're living the high life up here, maybe Buddhism doesn't sound quite so attractive. It's not offering you heaven. It's not offering you salvation. It's simply saying, if you would like to stop suffering, stop desiring. And then the fourth noble truth is called the Eightfold Path, which is shockingly similar to the Ten Commandments in a Buddhist version. And it gives proper conduct on your type of work, your relationships, what you eat, what you drink, how you treat others, creation, etc. and that will help you not suffer in this world. But that's all they are offering. But in the end, what the Buddha is hoping you understand is there is no you. Suffering comes from the ego self, when you think you are separate from the one. But when you realize the universe am I, you are it, then suffering doesn't really mean anything anymore. Nothing means anything anymore. But everything means everything at the same time. Yes. In fact, some people call Buddhist atheist or nihilist because of that. Isn't that wild? But there's sects of Buddhism that pray to Buddha like you guys pray to Jesus. And they have Buddhist praise songs and Buddhist potlucks and Buddhist devotionals. And once again, I'm giving you such a cursory overview of these Eastern traditions, but within these different sects, you have all these different styles and variations.
So by saying that they don't want to suffer, so by having no desire, you don't suffer. But then by having no desire to suffer, isn't that desiring?
Yes, which means you're going to suffer.
Yeah. So
You
then
can't even
desiring-
desire not to desire.
Because then you're desiring. So then you just suffer no matter what.
Well, no, you stop desiring.
But then by desiring not to desire,
Well, you don't desire not to desire.
but then
You just stop desiring.
but you can't just stop desiring because you're desiring something either way.
Really?
I think so.
Haven't you ever been in a relationship or with a family member where it gets so toxic and hostile that you just have to let go of any expectations of that person?
Yeah.
And then you're free because they can't hurt you anymore because you don't have any expectations of them. And you would just broaden that out to life. With old age, sickness, death, etc., it becomes indifferent to you because it's illusion. That's all stuff that's going to pass away. Everything you can see around you will be gone. All the people, all the forest, all the buildings, none of this will be here. So what is real? Where is the reality?
Wait, to be Buddhist, then I would argue that you just empty yourself of all humanity.
Well, right, because humanity too is illusion.
Okay. So if they don't desire anything, then how can they choose to empty themselves if they don't desire? I think,
Right? And that becomes their own paradox and struggle, right? And it's a clever thought, but that clever thought is not going to free you from suffering. It's only going to cause more suffering. One of the types of Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, they practice, it's called no-mind meditation, where the point isn't like in Hinduism to repeat maybe a mantra or saying. In no-mind meditation, you are literally emptying your mind. You're watching the thoughts float by like clouds in the sky or fish in a creek. You see them, you observe them, but you do not engage them. You do not let them control you. You do not let them affect you. And it's like that cosmic universal observer of all things that they're trying to tap into without being connected to an individual self or ego perspective. But see, I want to wrap this up now, and we can talk more. We can do another session of this too, because we didn't even get to Taoism, not even a cursory one, and that's, if I wasn't a Christian or a Sufi, I would probably be a Taoist. Anyways, yeah, Sufis, mystical Islam. Yes, yeah, it's a different breed. Anyways, the distinctions I want to make for you in closing between Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity is when you kind of look at them, they seem like they're from different planets. They're certainly from different sides of the planet, right? But as you begin to study them and see what the teachings are past the folk traditions and superstitions, they come so close together, but I don't believe they ever touch. Now, the Hindu would say quite comfortably, oh yeah, Christianity is just a younger version of what we've been teaching for millennia. And Christians, if they follow the Jesus path, they will reach the same place we're going through Krishna or Rama or whichever path they have chosen in their way for knowledge. And so that's the inclusivity, where in Christianity, what does Jesus say? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. I am the door. Anyone who comes in is otherwise is a thief and a robber. And so really different context here, right, between what the Buddha is saying or these Hindu gurus and sages and what Jesus is saying. And the other difference is through our enlightenment or that deconstruction, we do not become God. In Christianity, God puts us to death. Christians often like the little saying, Jesus saves, but it's equally accurate to say Jesus slays, because you have to be put to death to be in Christ. You have to die to self, you have to be crucified with Christ to be knit together with the Spirit of God, which is in Jesus, which is in the Father. And there we are one. For the Hindu, that self is illusion. I do not believe Fred is an illusion. In Christian terms, I believe Fred was created in the image of God, whose relationship was broken from God and had to be restored through Christ. And that is where you have the atonement and the blood sacrifice and the covering. And I was talking about when God the Father looks at us, it's through those Jesus goggles. But for the Hindu, that's not their solution. Their solution is annihilation of the false ego self, and then I can be in that communion of the universal mind. But I have to do that through my study, my effort, my learning, my understanding. And the same in Buddhism. So that is correct. Unfortunately, many Christians are in that work out process as well. They think they have to do all these things or not do all these things to get to this point where they're acceptable and pleasing to God. But I would say that's a false gospel. That is not the gospel. And I'm going to end on that. But like I said, I will linger and talk as long as you want. Thank you. That was kind of an abrupt full the. That was too much for one sitting. I am sorry, but.